Once upon a time, on the very edge of a deep and ancient forest, lived a poor woodcutter, his wife, and their two children, a boy named Hansel and a girl named Gretel. The family had very little to eat, for a great famine had swept over the land, leaving their cupboards bare. One night, as the children lay in their beds, too hungry to sleep, they overheard their parents speaking in hushed, worried tones. "Husband," the wife said, her voice filled with despair, "we can no longer feed our children. The last loaf of bread is gone. We must take them into the deepest part of the forest and leave them there, for they will surely starve if we do not. At least this way they will find berries to eat, and perhaps some other family will find them and take them in." The woodcutter's heart was broken, and he cried out in anguish, for he could not bear the thought of losing his children, but his wife's insistence wore him down, and he finally agreed to her terrible plan. Hansel, a clever and thoughtful boy, had heard every word. He crept out of bed and went to the back door of the cottage, where the pale moonlight shone brightly. He found a pocket full of white, glistening pebbles that he had collected earlier that day and filled his pockets to the brim. He then went back to bed and quietly comforted his sister Gretel, telling her not to worry, that he had a plan. The next morning, before the sun had even risen, the woodcutter's wife woke the children. "Wake up, lazybones," she said, her voice stern. "We are going into the forest to gather wood." She gave them a small piece of dry bread for their breakfast, and then they all walked deep into the dark woods. As they walked, Hansel would lag behind, pretending to look at a wildflower or a bright butterfly. Each time he stopped, he would secretly drop one of his white pebbles onto the path. He created a glittering trail that shone in the faint light of the rising sun. They walked on and on until they reached a place where the trees were so thick that the sky was a distant patch of blue. The woodcutter's wife told the children to rest beside a fire while she and their father went to chop wood. They told them they would be back for them soon, but the children, exhausted, fell asleep, and when they awoke, the fire was just a pile of cold ash, and their parents were nowhere to be found. Hansel was not afraid. He held Gretel's hand and said, "Don't worry, we will follow the trail of my bright pebbles, and they will lead us home." They walked through the woods as the moon rose high in the sky, and there, sparkling on the ground, was the trail of white pebbles. They followed the path all the way back to their home, and with a sigh of relief, they crept into their beds. The woodcutter, overjoyed to see his children safe, was filled with a mix of joy and shame. The wife, however, was furious. A few nights later, the famine having grown even worse, she convinced her husband to try again. This time, she locked the door so that Hansel could not get out to gather pebbles. In the morning, she gave them only a tiny crust of bread to share. As they walked into the forest, Hansel crumbled his bread into small pieces and dropped them along the path. But by the time they turned to find their way home, they found that the birds had come down and eaten every single crumb. There was nothing left. They were truly lost in the deep, dark woods. For 2 days and 2 nights, the children wandered through the forest, their stomachs aching with hunger. They ate the last of the wild berries they could find, and their clothes were torn and dirty. Just as their hope was about to fade, they saw a small, beautiful house in a clearing. It was not a house made of wood or stone, but a house made of gingerbread, its roof a mosaic of glistening candies, and its windows made of sugar. Hansel and Gretel were so hungry they could hardly believe their eyes. They ran to the house and without a moment's hesitation began to eat. Hansel broke off a piece of the gingerbread door and Gretel pulled a piece of the sugary window pane, and they feasted with a joy they had not known in a long time. Suddenly, a sweet voice called out from inside, "Nibble, nibble, like a mouse who is nibbling at my house?" Hansel and Gretel replied, the wind, a child of the sky, nibbling at a house that's passed us by." But the door opened and a very old woman with a kind smile invited them in. "Come inside, children. You must be so hungry and tired," she said. The old woman gave them a warm meal of milk and pancakes and gave them soft, cozy beds to sleep in. The children thought they had found a new home, but what they did not know was that the old woman was a wicked witch who built her candy house to lure in lost children whom she would then eat. The next morning, she showed her true colors. She dragged Hansel away and locked him in a small cage in the cellar. "You will stay here until you are fat enough for me to eat," she cackled. She then forced Gretel to work as a servant, making her cook and clean all day long. Every morning, the witch would go to Hansel's cage and say, "Hold out your finger, little boy, so I can see if you are getting fat." But Hansel, being clever, held out a small bone he had found, and the witch, whose eyesight was very poor, would feel it and be fooled, thinking he was still far too thin. Day after day, she grew more and more impatient. She wanted to eat Hansel, and her hunger was growing fierce. Finally, after many weeks, the witch could wait no longer. "I am tired of waiting," she said, her voice a snarl. "I will eat him tomorrow, whether he is fat or not." She ordered Gretel to prepare a great fire in the oven to bake bread. Gretel, a wise girl, knew the witch had something terrible planned. When the oven was hot, the witch said, "Climb in, child, and see if the heat is right. I want to bake my bread." Gretel, however, knew the witch wanted to push her in and bake her as well. She shook her head. "I don't know how to do that," she said, her voice feigning innocence. "Show me how." The witch, frustrated and angry, threw open the oven door and bent down, putting her head in to show Gretel what to do. In that very moment, Gretel, with all her strength, gave the witch a great shove from behind. The witch fell headfirst into the oven, and Gretel quickly slammed the door shut and fastened the lock. She had saved herself and her brother. Gretel then ran to the cellar and freed Hansel. They embraced each other with tears of joy. They knew they were free, but they were still in the witch's house. As they looked around, they found a room filled with boxes of gold, silver, and sparkling jewels. It was the witch's treasure. They filled their pockets and clothes with as much as they could carry and fled the house, finding their way through the forest and to their home. They were greeted by their father, who wept with joy and sorrow, for his wife had died while they were gone, and he had spent every day since filled with regret. He had never stopped looking for them. With the witch's treasure, the family was no longer poor, and they lived happily ever after. A lesson learned that even in the darkest of times, courage and cleverness can save you.